The first thing I felt wasn't fear, but the temperature of the floor, the polished Carrara marble ice cold against my cheek as a heavy boot pressed into the small of my back, pinning me down while I could hear the frantic tearing of silk, the crashing of porcelain, and the guttural shouts of men who had no business in a princess's private wing. "And where is it, Amira?" The voice barked. It was Sheikh Mansour, the head of our local Mutaween, the religious police, who didn't use my title because in this moment I wasn't a royal but a suspect. And I kept my eyes shut, my forehead pressed against the stone, my heart a wild animal trapped in my chest, thumping so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs, because I knew what they were looking for, underneath the velvet lining of my jewelry box. And tucked beneath layers of gold necklaces and emeralds that could buy a city was a small black book, a Bible, and in Saudi Arabia that book was more dangerous than a loaded serpentine. To them, it was poison. To me, it had become the only air I could breathe. And I heard the splintering of wood. A gasp. "Found it!" a guard whispered, his voice thick with triumph and disgust. And I felt the boot lift from my back as I was hauled up by my arms, my abaya torn at the shoulder. Sheikh Mansour holding the Bible between two fingers as if it were a dead rat, his eyes burning with a religious fervor that felt like a desert wind. "You have traded the truth for a lie," he spat. "You have brought shame upon the House of Saud. Do you know the price for this, princess?" And my mind flashed back to how I got it, the secret nights of reading, and the man I had met in my dreams, the man who told me I was loved, as the guards began to drag me toward the door, toward a darkness I knew I might never return from. I realized my life as I knew it was over. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to die. And before I tell you how I survived that night, and who walked into my cell when all hope was lost, I want to ask you something. Because if you are watching this, it isn't by accident. Since there are millions of people living in spiritual cages just like I was, so please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it, because your one click could be the light that reaches someone sitting in the dark in Riyadh, Tehran, or Kabul. And my name is Amira. I am 32 years old, and for most of my life my name was synonymous with power, because to the world I was the girl who had everything. Growing up in a palace where the faucets were plated in gold and the gardens were kept lush in the middle of a scorched desert by a small army of servants. But luxury is a very effective distraction from a starving soul. And in our world, religion wasn't a choice, but the atmosphere you breathed. And from the moment I could speak, I was taught the 5 pillars, learning to recite the Quran in perfect tajweed, the melodic Arabic flowing from my throat while my heart remained like a frozen lake. And I wore the niqab when I went out, a black veil that covered everything but my eyes. And people thought it was a sign of modesty, but to me, it felt like a shroud, because I was a ghost walking through my own life. And I remember standing on my balcony overlooking the city, hearing the adhan, the call to prayer, echoing from 1,000 minarets, Allahu Akbar, God is great, and I would perform my wudu, washing my hands and feet in a ritual I had done 10,000 times. But I felt filthy on the inside because I was performing for a God who felt 1 billion miles away, a God who demanded submission but never offered conversation. And my father was a man of high standing, a prince with a lineage that commanded respect, who loved me, I think, in the way a man loves a prize stallion or a rare diamond, an ornament of his prestige. "Amira," he would say, "your virtue is the pride of this family. Never let a crack show in your devotion." But the cracks were already there because I was spiritually hungry. And looking at the stars over the Arabian Peninsula and wondering, are you even there? Do you see me? Or am I just a number in a ledger of sins and good deeds, because I didn't want a master, but a father. And the turning point began with a funeral when my mother, the only person who truly saw me, passed away suddenly, and the palace felt colder, the gold dimmer. And at her burial, I watched the men perform the rites, while women were kept at a distance, and I wasn't allowed to hold her hand one last time or whisper goodbye. And when I asked the local imam why I felt such a void, he said, "You must pray more, princess. Increase your charity. Fast more. Your heart is restless because you are not submitting enough, not even looking me in the eye." And the hypocrisy started to become loud as I saw the religious police harassing poor migrant workers for closing their shops 2 minutes late for prayer, while the wealthy princes drank expensive wine behind closed doors, publicly demanding the strictest adherence to Sharia. And one night I was on my phone scrolling through social media, hidden behind the palace's high-speed firewalls, when an ad popped up with a simple image of a cross and the words, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And I froze because I had been taught the Bible was corrupted and that Christians worshipped 3 gods. But those words, rest, hit me like a physical blow. And with a shaking hand, I bypassed the state filters and downloaded a Bible app, now hiding it inside a folder labeled Interior Design, checking my door twice every time I opened it, because I was a princess of Saudi Arabia committing the ultimate treason by seeking a different king. And I started with the Gospel of John. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And my breath hitched, because in Islam God is one, distant and indivisible, but here was a God who stepped into time, a God who became flesh, and I read about Jesus healing the blind, defending the woman caught in adultery, a woman who would have been stoned to death in my city. And I saw him weeping at the grave of Lazarus, a God who weeps. I couldn't wrap my mind around it, and the identity crisis was violent. I felt like my skin was being peeled off, because if this was true, everything my father, my teachers, and my country stood for was wrong. And one afternoon I fell into a deep sleep and had a dream where I was standing in the middle of the empty quarter dying of thirst, my throat cracked, my tongue swollen, and then I saw a man wearing a simple white garment that seemed to catch the light of a sun that wasn't there, walking across the burning sand as if it were a cool meadow, standing before me and holding out his hands with scars in his wrists. And he said, "Amira, why do you seek the living among the dead? I am the water you have been looking for. Drink, and you will never thirst again." And he handed me a cup of water colder than mountain snow. And when I drank, the desert around me turned into a garden, and I woke up weeping, the taste of that water still on my lips, knowing then that I didn't just believe in a book, but that I knew him. And I became careless because joy is hard to hide in a house built on fear. And I was caught by my personal maid Salma, whispering a name she didn't recognize, Jesus, and she was a loyalist to the Mutaween hoping for a reward. And the raid happened 3 days later, and as I mentioned before, they found the Bible, and they found my notes, and they found the peace in my eyes, and that was what offended them most. And I was dragged from the palace, not to a public prison, but to a private re-education cell beneath a government building, a room of concrete and shadows. And for 2 days I was interrogated, Sheikh Mansour bringing in an imam to correct me, using not physical torture at first, but emotional blackmail. "Your father's heart is breaking. He is being stripped of his positions because of your filth. You are a cancer in the Holy Land. Now just say the Shahada. Say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, and you can go home. We will tell the world you had a nervous breakdown." And I sat on the floor, my hair matted, my body aching, and whispered, "I cannot lie. I have found the truth, and his name is Jesus." And the Sheikh's face contorted as he backhanded me so hard, my vision went black. "He is a prophet who died. He is not a god. You will rot here until the sword meets your neck." And they slammed the heavy iron door, leaving me in total suffocating darkness, where I felt the weight of my family's rejection. No longer a daughter, but a traitor. And I curled into a ball on the cold floor and whispered, "Jesus, if you are real, don't let me die alone." And the darkness in that cell was so thick I could feel it on my skin. Not just the absence of light, but the presence of despair. And I began to hear the voices of my upbringing saying, "You are cursed. You are going to hell. God has abandoned you." And I started to shake from the cold seeping into my bones as I thought about the execution square and the blade. And then it happened. A small pinprick of light appeared in the corner of the room, not coming from the door, or a window since there were no windows, and the light began to expand. Not yellow or white, but a living radiance that had a weight to it, and the temperature in the room shifted. The biting chill vanished, replaced by a warmth that felt like a summer evening. And then he was there. He didn't come through the door, but simply was. He was the man from the desert, but he was more. And his presence was so holy that I found myself flat on my face, not out of fear, but out of a desperate need to worship. And I felt a hand on my shoulder, electric, sending a surge of life through my body, healing the bruises, calming my heart. "Peace be with you, Amira," he said. And I looked up, and his eyes were like flames of love, not the burning fire of judgment I had been taught to fear, but a fire that consumes everything except the truth. "They can chain your body," he said, looking at the stone walls as if they were made of glass. "But I have set your spirit free. You are mine. No one can pluck you from my hand." And I don't know how long he stayed, because in that moment, the cell became a cathedral, and my fear of death didn't just fade, but died. And when the light eventually faded, the darkness was no longer scary, because I was no longer a prisoner, but a witness. And the next morning, the door swung open, and 2 guards marched me to a brightly lit room with a long mahogany table, where my father sat at the head looking 10 years older with red eyes. "Amira," he said, his voice cracking, "this is your final chance. The council has met. For the sake of our blood, for the sake of the king, recant this madness. Admit the Christians deceived you." And I looked at him, feeling a profound sadness, not for myself, but for him, because he was a prince of this world, yet more of a slave than I was. "Father," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I have not been deceived. I have been found." And the Imam slammed his fist on the table. "You speak of the Son of God. It is a blasphemy that makes the heavens shake." And I replied, "The heavens are shaking, but they are shaking with joy. I met him last night. In the cell you locked me in. He came to me. Can your prophet do that? Can your law give me the peace I have right now while I face my own death?" And the room went silent, the guards looking at each other unsettled. "And she is possessed by a jinn," the Imam screamed, and I said, "No, I am possessed by the Holy Spirit. You can take my head, you can take my name, you can take my inheritance, but you cannot take what he has given me." And my father stood up, his face mask-like. "I have no daughter," he whispered, turning his back on me, handing me over to the executioners, and I was led back to a different holding area with the execution set for the following dawn. And that night, a young guard named Tariq came to my cell to bring me water, looking terrified. "I was watching the monitor last night," he whispered, trembling. "Before the cameras cut to static, I saw the light in your cell. I saw you talking to someone. Who was he?" And I told Tariq about Jesus, that the King of Kings loves even a guard in a dark prison, and tears tracked through the dust on his face. "I cannot let them kill you," he said. "There are others, secret believers in the palace staff. We have been waiting for a moment like this. And what followed was a blur of miracles, a series of coincidences that could only be orchestrated by God. A power outage that blinded the thermal cameras for exactly 10 minutes, a side gate left unlocked, a car waiting in the shadows of an alleyway. And as we drove through the desert toward the border, I looked back at the lights of the city, leaving behind billions of dollars, a life of prestige, and my entire history. A refugee with nothing but the clothes on my back and a small digital copy of the Word of God. And the moral conflict was a heavy weight, because I loved my country and I loved my mother's memory. But as we crossed the border, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had carried since I was a child, because I was no longer Amira of the House of Saud, but Amira, daughter of the living God. And today, I live in a small apartment in a city far away from the desert, working a simple job, buying my own groceries, walking the streets unrecognized, a nobody to the world but never more royal. And I have a new family now, a church that meets in a basement made up of people from every nation. And when we sing, I don't feel the coldness of a ritual, but the heat of a living fire. And I have been baptized in water, symbolizing the death of the princess and the birth of the new woman. And my father has officially declared me dead, and in the eyes of Saudi law, I do not exist. But I have a name written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and that is a title that can never be revoked. And to those of you watching this, especially if you are in a place where following Jesus costs you everything, do not be afraid, because the golden cages of this world are nothing compared to the freedom of the cross. And Islam taught me to fear God, but Jesus taught me to love Him. And if you are searching for the truth, if you are tired of the mechanical prayers and the silence of the heavens, I am here to tell you He is knocking. He walked into my prison cell, and He can walk into your room right now. And you don't need a palace to find Him. You just need a broken heart. So thank you for listening to my testimony. And remember, you are never alone, and no darkness is too thick for His light to break through. God bless you,